So, what if the entire world is about to hit a massive tipping point? Today, we're going to dive into a really intense forecast for October 2025. Now, this is all based on Eastern metaphysics, and it argues that a huge global reversal is literally just around the corner.
And the whole thing really comes down to this one single, counterintuitive question. Think about this. What if this feeling of a global boom, of things reaching a kind of fever pitch, isn't actually a sign of more growth to come, but the final, blaring warning sign before everything flips?
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the core idea driving this whole forecast. Then we'll look at the global symptoms and what it means for different regions. After that, we'll dive into the economy, talk about some personal strategies for getting through the turmoil, and then finally, take a quick peek at what 2026 might hold.
Okay, first up, let's really get into the engine behind this entire forecast, this principle of a peak and then the inevitable reversal.
It all comes from this concept called Fen. It's a classic Taoist idea, and it basically just means that when anything reaches an extreme, it's gotta reverse. The best way to think about it is like a rubber band. You stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. Eventually, it's either gonna snap back or break completely. Well, this forecast is applying that exact same idea to our entire global situation right now.
And this forecast pinpoints October 2025 as that exact moment of maximum tension, the point where the rubber band is stretched to its absolute limit. It's described as the very peak of a deceptive prosperity, the last gasp before the snapback. And this isn't just some vague feeling either. The source claims there's real evidence in what's already happening around the world.
So, what are these signs they're talking about? Well, that brings us right to our next section, a world on edge, and the symptoms that the source claims are already starting to show.
Now, here's what's so fascinating. The source actually builds its case by forecasting a whole series of destabilizing events for September 2025, and it frames them as the crucial warm-up act for the main event in October. We're talking major protests, huge leadership shakeups, and serious geopolitical flare-ups, all positioned as the tremors before the big earthquake. And building on all that chaos predicted for September, the forecast for October itself is, well, it's pretty grim. It suggests everything just escalates across the board. More civil unrest, more leaders getting forced out of power, and all these hidden systemic problems just bursting out into the open. The source even uses this really chilling term, bloodlight, to describe intensified conflict right alongside a major surge in extreme weather. But here's the thing. This energy isn't predicted to hit every place in the same way. So let's break down how this massive global shift is expected to play out across the different major power centers of the world. You can see right here, the forecast paints a dramatically different picture for each region. You've got North America with a deceptive boom, Europe facing conflict and breakthrough. Meanwhile, China's predicted to have a sharp ascent, Russia a painful transformation, and Southeast Asia is looking at stagnation. It seems like everyone's path through this thing is going to be unique. Let's start with North America, because the source describes it as a total paradox. On the surface, right, everything looks like it's recovering, maybe even expanding. But underneath that shiny surface, it's pointing to huge red flags. Consumer spending dropping off a cliff, really weak job numbers, and major policy risks on the horizon. The key takeaway here, that appearance of strength is, allegedly, just a mask. Now, for Europe, the energy is described as way more direct. The prediction is for these really intense power struggles that are going to force leaders to make big, decisive, and probably polarizing moves. And that process is going to forge brand new alliances, while at the same time creating some powerful new opposition. Basically, the forecast sees Europe heading for a really turbulent, but ultimately necessary breakthrough. And for China, the forecast is all about a sharp ascent. It points to this really powerful energy for reform, positioning the country to become a clear regional leader. But, and this is a big but, there's a critical warning. If that power is pushed too assertively, it risks sparking all new conflicts. It's that classic story, right? Great power brings great risk. So, all of this turmoil and flux, it all leads us to the economy, which is where the source issues its most urgent warnings about this so-called deceptive boom.
This quote from the source really just nails the whole financial warning. That feeling of market euphoria, that sense that things can only go up and up, it's presented not as an opportunity, but as the final, frantic, crazy moments right before a collapse. The advice? It's simple. Control your greed.
And as proof of this disconnect, the source points to data like this absolutely massive discrepancy in U.S. employment numbers. I mean, look at this. A projection of 1 million new jobs was met with an actual number of just 90,000, a staggering 91% miss. That's not just a miss, that's presented as proof that the economic reality is dangerously out of touch with the story we're being told.
The forecast then gets super specific. It pinpoints November 2025, the month right after this supposed peak, as the moment the economic energy turns abnormal. And that is flagged as the highest risk window for a major market correction, or at least the beginning of a very serious downturn.
So with such a stark outlook, you're probably wondering, what does the source say we should do on a personal level, right? How can any of us navigate a period that sounds this chaotic?
Well, this is where the advice shifts from the big picture to the very personal. The logic here is that in a time of so much collective negative energy, your best defense is to build up your own personal positive energy. The recommendations are pretty straightforward but powerful. Focus on good deeds, kind words, helping others, basically creating a positive buffer for yourself. The idea is that these actions aren't just nice things to do. They actually generate a kind of protective energy, while things like meditation can help build up your own inner resilience against all the chaos outside.
And finally, let's just zoom out for a second. This forecast doesn't see October 2025 as just a one-off event. No, it sees it as the kickoff to an even more intense period.
The source actually frames the entire 2025 to 2027 period as a great revolution. And it specifically calls out 2026, the year of the fire horse, as the absolute peak of this chaotic, transformative energy. So what that suggests is that the turmoil of late 2025 is really only the beginning of a multi-year global reset. The whole symbolism of fire for 2026 is presented as having two sides. On the one hand, yeah, it represents destruction, turmoil, war, widespread anger. But fire is also a symbol of transformation. It represents rapid breakthroughs, especially in areas like smart technology. So the forecast is really painting a picture of intense destruction and intense creation, both happening at the exact same time. And so we end up right back where we started. According to this source, the Great Reversal isn't a question of if, but when, and it's arguing that when is right now. It really just leaves us with one final critical question. If this truly is the peak, are you prepared for what comes next?